Hi, my name is Amanda Herzog. I'm the founder of Intertalents in Sweden, where I create course content, videos, webinars, and other helpful material for international professionals trying to integrate into the Swedish workforce.
Hi, my name is Saaya Rutherford. I am the CEO and co-founder of Emigreat, a Sweden-based startup. We are a digital infrastructure helping companies maintain legal compliance for their international employees with the ultimate goal of giving everyone the opportunity to work and live beyond borders.
Yes, so today what we will be talking about is an interesting topic, which are the cultural differences between job searching in Sweden versus other countries. My personal background before I founded Intertalents in Sweden is that I moved to Sweden from the US, from Orlando, Florida, to Jönköping in 2017 as an exchange student. And so I graduated college in 2018 and I thought, I'll get a job in a few months. I can always manage in my home country. That wasn't the case. Did you have a similar experience or?
Yeah, so I'm half Japanese, half American. So I grew up in Japan and then obviously grew up with the American culture as well. And I lived all around the world and moved here in 2019 after living in Honduras for 6 years. So I'd say it was also a bit of a culture shock, but I think for me it was a bit easier because I could reflect more on my Japanese culture, which I think is a bit more similar to Swedish culture than American, but there's definitely cultural differences.
Yeah, so today what we wanted to do is just talk about some of the cultural differences that we noticed that they weren't obvious right away. We kind of learned through trial and error, and so we both have an understanding of the American job market. We both have an understanding now of the Swedish job market. Saaya has some experience with the Japanese job market, so we're just going to go through some of these points today, and hopefully this can give you guys some insight into how to start looking out for cultural differences that might exist in your culture and see, is this common in Sweden or do I need to make some adjustments? So one of the first differences that I learned was the interview process in Sweden is different than American, but in a subtle way. And so I'm going to tell you guys a funny story. So in the US, it's very common during interviews to really sell yourself. You need to be confident. You need to show them that you believe in the work you can do. You usually lead with your accomplishments. You try to quantify work you've done. By quantify, I mean I increased sales by 36% in 6 months. And you go right into that usually in the beginning of an interview. And so I was doing this in the Swedish job market for months. I would get interviews, but not a second interview. And finally, I asked someone who, in a kind soul, told me the truth. We're too afraid to hire you because you're too American for our Swedish team. And what they meant by this is that it came off in their impression that it was a bit assertive or maybe too overpowering of communication. And so what I started doing is learning that you need to not show off your accomplishments, but you need to lead with your personal connection first. So what I started doing is going into interviews and basically saying, hi, my name's Amanda. Okay, I'm interested in, long walks in nature. Here's a little bit of my professional background, but here's also my personality. It's almost like dating. You just want to have that connection first. You don't want to go on a first date and say, my house costs this much. My clothes are, I buy my clothes here. You want to get to know the person and then with an invitation, go into your accomplishments in the workplace. Did you notice anything similar?
I think I did. I think, though, in Japan, it's much more about the collective than it would be about the individual. So I think that in that sense, Japan's a bit more similar to Sweden. The only thing is you wouldn't actually lead with your hobbies in Japan because that's not so much about that. So it is about trying to show how much of a team player you are. In interviews, but I wouldn't lead actually with I don't think that many Japanese would lead with what their hobbies are because that doesn't matter quite as much.
Okay, so let's move on to a second difference that between like the US and the Swedish job market. So the second difference is that I learned that it's safe to talk about your personal life, your hobbies, and your family life, things that would kind of be a bit taboo in American culture. So, for example, in American culture, a lot of people will not talk in detail about their family life. Unfortunately, especially if they have children, because it's not always, the best part of American culture, but some employers think that having children are a bit of a liability in terms of your availability. But in Sweden, it's really quite well respected that you have a family. And in fact, a lot of companies feel in Sweden that if you have a family, it shows that you're committed. It shows that you're going to be a more stable option for the job because you're less likely to just move away or to leave spontaneously. You have a family to take care of. And also they like to know your hobbies outside of work because it gives them insight into your personality and your character in the workplace and if you would be a good fit for their team. Whereas in the US, they have a little bit more of a mindset of what can you do for us? What can you accomplish in the workplace? I don't really care that much what you do outside of work as long as it doesn't interfere with us here and you get the job done. Of course, not every workplace is like this, but it's the general culture. Do you agree?
Yes, I think yes. I think that kind of showing you have a life outside of work, and especially when it comes to even networking events, asking people right away what are your hobbies seems to be a much easier way to start conversations here rather than what do you do.
It's
for
true.
For
That's
work
true.
It's the hobbies that really gets people talking. So like even just outside of work, any even work networking things, hobbies is definitely the way that it seems to connect with people here.
Yeah, so that's another big thing. If you come from a culture where you kind of leave that out of the workplace, it might be uncomfortable to start talking about it in Sweden, your personal life, but they really want to get to know who you are first, and then your qualifications, what you've accomplished, that comes later on and once they feel comfortable with you. So my third point that I want to bring up about the difference between US and Swedish job searching and professional culture is that the process moves much slower. I think that's something that you would understand working at Emigreat with visa applications, but the process moves so slow. Usually the hiring process on average is about 3 months, and by hiring process, that means like the first interview to signing the contract and the actual start date. One of the reasons for this is that most people have to give a 3-month termination that they're going to leave, or if a company terminates an employee or they become redundant, they usually have to give an employee 3-month notice before they fire them. Also, after the 6-month probationary period has passed, it is a lot harder to let's say remove someone from a company. So companies really take their time in terms of making that decision and making sure it's the right decision. But there's also the fact that administration in Sweden, there's sort of this mentality of it'll get done when it gets done, when we get to it. There's not this sense of urgency. So I would say if you come from a culture where you can plan to get hired and start next week, it's highly unlikely in Sweden. What are your thoughts on this?
I do agree with that, and I'm kind of glad you brought up Emigreat, because that's an important part that I would want to tell people that are here on work permits, for example, is if you're here on a work permit and you lose your job, that is sponsoring that work permit, you then have 3 months to find a new job and a new company that's going to sponsor that permit. But 3 months in the scheme of how it takes to recruit in Sweden is not a very long time. So it's really important to understand and to always potentially be prepared for that possibility and have kind of plans lined up. How are you going to get the next job if you want to stay in Sweden? Because it's not something that you can just plan in less than 3 months. So there's definitely that you always need to think about when you're emigrating to Sweden for work purposes. I think probably the reason that they don't have that much urgency is because companies are so used to having to fill 1-year positions for, you know, maternity leave and so much vacation time, that I think that they just take a more relaxed approach, because maybe if they were stressed about filling spaces, they would always be stressed considering how many spots they always have open. But it is a really important thing to know, is that you're right, it does take a long time. I mean, 3 months would probably be on the faster side of things. That you do need to be prepared that these things take a long time, and you need to not potentially have all of your eggs in one basket.
Yeah, so exactly. I totally agree, and that's been my personal experience here. So these are the 3 things that I like to share as just a general starting point. What are the differences in U.S. and Swedish culture? But do you have anything to share about the Japanese culture and how you notice it was different from the Swedish professional job searching experience?
I think that actually Japan and Sweden are surprisingly similar, considering that we seem like we're very different cultures. So especially when it comes to kind of not showing off and having processes take a long time, that certainly is much more in line with the Japanese culture. I would say the 2 biggest differences between Japan and Sweden is it's a very flat organizational structure here, whereas in Japan we're much more hierarchical. So I think that management level Japanese people that come to Sweden would probably struggle a bit with that complete lack of hierarchy.
It's different.
As well as the fact that in Sweden they do tend to take a lot of breaks and a lot of those coffee times in order to chat and get to know people, which I have some friends that work for a Japanese company that also has an office in Sweden, and anytime the Japanese management comes over, they're pulling their hair out and everybody just drinking coffee and playing ping pong. But I think actually understanding these cultural differences ahead of time is really important, which is why I think the work that you're doing is so important. And actually, I've learned a lot about the differences between the different cultures in Sweden as well through your courses, if you wanted to kind of tell everybody about that as well.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. So what we're discussing today is actually a topic that is covered in my course on the intertalentsinSweden.com website. And I'll also leave a link below where you can find it. But the course is called Network Your Way to a Job in Sweden. And what it does essentially is it teaches you about the mentality of Swedish culture, but it also goes into a section where it talks about how do you adapt to the Swedish culture from wherever you are in your culture. It could be any culture in the world, and we use a particular tool called Hofstede Insights, where we teach people how do you find out the exact differences between your culture on a scale, and how do you take actions to better adjust to the way that the mentality is in Sweden. And it works for any culture, and you can take all different types of steps where you meet in the middle with the Swedish culture. So I will be leaving the link down below where you can access the course, and you will get a bigger overview of how can you find out where it can be different in your culture with Swedish culture. And if you have a particular example leave it in the comments below. And the reason why we want you to leave it in the comments is so that someone else who is from your country can see this. Maybe you are aware of it, or perhaps you've been in Sweden for a while and you've noticed, but someone is watching this video from another country and they have no clue what they're about to get into. It took me over a year at least to even learn that I was making this mistake and not getting new interviews. As soon as I learned this and I changed my strategy, I immediately started getting second interviews. So you can help someone out there and me as well. I don't know every single cultural difference in the world, but I do know that there are steps we can take to adapt. So leave a comment below, and also check out the course if that's something that seems interesting for you. If you'd like to learn about not only what are the differences, but how do I actually take steps to adapt to it while also maintaining my own cultural identity, but adapting into Swedish culture as well. So.
Absolutely, and I can actually offer a testimonial for your course. I used your networking tips for a networking event in Sweden, and actually got like much better relationships out of that networking event as well. So I can vouch for that one too.
That's cool to hear. This is the first time I'm actually hearing about this, but yeah, I really appreciate it, and I'm really glad to see that these tips are helping people. So yeah, thanks for joining me today, and we will also be sharing your website down below if anyone wants more information about just how the visa laws are. And
so any kind of immigration related questions you might have, or kind of want to learn how to become an international employee in Sweden, you can also check us out at Emigreat.